Welcome again, and my name is Mickey Renders. I think everybody's seen my face a few times now, and I'm one of the organizers of Environmental Racism is Garbage. This is our last panel, our artist panel, and I guess it might be nice. There's a lot of us presenting. If you wanted to do an acknowledgement of the land you're on and introduce yourself in the chat, that would be really welcome. Or not. And I think other than that, I really would like everyone to welcome Laurie Beavis, who has been an amazing ally in this. We early on realized that we did need some advice from a curator, and especially someone who'd been working with Indigenous communities. And Laurie has been really great in a pinch when we needed that real wisdom. And we really appreciate having you, Laurie. You don't know how much it's meant to us, but it's meant a lot. So anyway, Laurie, this is your panel. Thank you so much. And I'll let you carry on.
Okay, Ani, thank you. And thank you, Mickey, for that moment as well. That was really important for us today and for the time to come. Welcome to the last panel of the Environmental Racism is Welcome to the last panel of Environmental Racism is Garbage Symposium. I haven't attended as many things as I want to, but I've just looked at all the artist things today, and I'm just really so looking forward to going back and seeing everything that's been recorded and everything. So I'll begin by saying, Laurie Beavis, Indigenous Cause. My name is Laurie Beavis. Peterborough and Rice Lake, Doanjaba. My source communities are Peterborough and Hiawatha First Nation at Rice Lake, Ontario. Wawishkishi, Nododum. My clan is the Deer, the Helpers. My name is, as I said, Laurie Beavis. I'm the director of the Centre d'Art Daphne, and I'm at the first Indigenous Artist-run centre in Tiohtià:ke, Mouniang, Montreal. I'm an independent curator, an art historian, and an art educator. I'm of Michi-Sagig, Mississauga, Anishinaabe, and Irish, Welsh, and English descent, and a citizen of Hiawatha First Nation of Rice Lake, Ontario. My curatorial practice, art practice, and research articulates narrative and memory in the context of family, cultural history, and reflects on cultural identity, art education, and self-representation. And there's all of those things, and the kin and community are all really important to me. And I'm very interested in having people talk today about what they, how they're working within the context of their own kin and their community. And I'm really looking forward to everything that everybody has to say. I'm at Tiohtià:ke today, also called Mouniang by the Anishinaabe. I'm a visitor on this territory, and I'm honored to live and work here. Tiohtià:ke is the unceded Indigenous lands and the traditional territory of both the Kanekahaka, Mohawk, and the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples. And historically, it's known as a gathering place for many First Nations peoples and continues to be so today. I started thinking about this panel by considering the history of landscape painting. As I said, I'm an art historian to start with, and of course, I did all of those courses that everybody else did that sort of took you back in time and across time, and landscape was always something that always came forward. So thinking about those landscapes, paintings in the history of Euro-Western tradition, those idyllic and monumental landscape paintings in which there are rarely, if ever, images of people. And then we also know that they so often obliterated what was actually happening on the land. As John Barrell wrote almost 40 years ago about landscape paintings, are in fact reinterpreted or covered over a skewed representation of a world of social and economic relations that are anything but idyllic. And again, I was looking at some of the images today of the artist's works that's on the website, and so often the landscapes are monumental and beautiful and sublime, and again, they're still hiding the detritus and the dirt. So the interrogation by artists of colonialism, capitalism, extraction, and degradation of communities and landscapes will be the focus of this roundtable. I'm very pleased to welcome artists who have contributed to the panel and discuss issues relevant to their kin and community in the ways in which their practice makes the arts accessible and valuable as a tool for change. So I thought about this panel as a sort of, as a round table, as a way to reflect on the role of the arts as a tool to raise issues of environmental pollution, garbage, and the impact of degradation on individuals and communities. So I think we really would like it if everyone could start by introducing themselves, the artists who are on this panel today, so that we have a sense of who's here and where you're from, and perhaps a connection to your community, to your collective, and any information that you'd like to share a little bit about your art practice as well. And after that, then we'll create a metaphorical kitchen table, because as we all can't be together, and the kitchen table is where all the nitty gritty and all the things get done usually, and all the solutions are brought forward. That's what I'm hoping that we create here today, even though we're all spread out all over the place and we don't even, so anyway, welcome, and please, I think we'll just have people sort of step forward and just any artists that are wanting to participate, please introduce yourself.
If I could just jump in here for a second. It's Mickey here talking, and I wondered if maybe what we could do is, if people want to, once we get started, if people want to say something or contribute to the chat, they could just put their name in the chat. It just kind of is nice. Then there's, we're not waiting for someone to jump in and not afraid of that competition. And we can just use that as an order of speaking, if that works out.
Mickey, perhaps I could get you to introduce yourself and you start the ball rolling, as you're the artist that I know.
I'm happy to do that. So yeah, my name is Mickey Renders. I taught art for many years, and my practice has always been, I was a painter and loved painting landscapes and painting sort of things inspired by the world around me, but I'm also an ecologist and studied ecology at university as well. So it's always been for my work. But I found I started to accumulate a lot of work and decided that the consequences of the piling up of stuff was kind of bothering me. And I could paint all day and I would really love that, but it just felt a little bit it didn't feel right. So I started to do more and more kind of community-based work where there was a broader purpose, a social justice focus. And I did that throughout my career as a teacher, as well as in the community. And this project that I've worked on, the Pangerton Art and Waste Project, is really kind of coming out of that. It kind of satisfies so many of the things that I really love to do. I am really interested in, and one of them is really to give back. And I do feel there's some skills that I've learned, and as a facilitator, rather than centering myself in the project, I want to kind of forefront Inuit voices. We often think of the North and kind of think of the polar bears and the pristine landscape. But again, as Lori was saying, sometimes we miss the fact that, there are people living there, and those people we have not treated them very well. And I think there's a reckoning here that needs to happen. So if in some way I can offer just even to inform or fill the gap of some of the history that we're missing, that's the purpose of my project. And I think that's all I'll say about it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. Joy?
Hi. Gosh. So my name's Joy Schendel Decker, and I'm part of the collaborative project Untitled and Dispossessed, which is rooted in the collective practices of a larger group. So on a personal level, I'm an artist. I have 2 kids who are teenagers now. So my career has been very, very interrupted. And I come from more of a craft-based background, making small sculptures and fibers, things. So this project for me has been a new foray into a kind of social practice that really comes out of learning to be like a political organizer and doing mutual aid with others, particularly in people who are living outside in Santa Cruz. So there has been a steep learning curve. I've never worked collaboratively with people in this way before, both my own group members and people in the public. You know, learning some of the tech stuff and doing video and audio work has been a new challenge, but kind of exciting. And I'm pleased with how it's turned out, and how I think the project will continue and hopefully be part of, some effective, I don't want to say community building, but solidarity building practices that can lead to political changes in our very, very dysfunctional municipality. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Good, thank you. Sanita?
And is it okay, Lori, if my collaborator Ludmilla goes right after me, because we're part of the same project?
Sure.
Thanks so much. I'm Sunita Fazic. I'm a PhD candidate in cultural studies at Queen's University, pursuing a research creation project. Was sort of a mixture between making art and I suppose philosophizing. I specialize at the intersection of social and environmental justice and how that manifests in cultural productions. And I'm also a poet, a novelist, and a playwright. If you saw our talk yesterday from Land Matters, so I was a refugee. I'm a refugee from Bosnia and Herzegovina. My family, my mother and brother, we escaped the siege of Sarajevo. My father was stuck behind for 5 years, and we were refugees across 3 countries in Europe. Ended up as temporary guests in Geneva, Switzerland, which is a legal status below refugee. It's very precarious. You can't work. You have to be very, very poor. It was a very difficult situation, and my parents were united when the war ended and decided to immigrate to Canada. And we were sold this idea of settling comfortably. If you go on the Ontario government or Canada government website, there's a lot of language around settling comfortably. And so for us, the word settling, we were coming from hell. We thought that was our hope. It was a positive word for us. And it's just a huge shock to finally uncover the genocidal history and tendencies of Canada and try to contend with living on stolen land when we come from a country where our lands were stolen. A lot of our family members were brutally murdered. So it's been a really difficult reckoning for me. So this project, part of my PhD project, is called Land Matters. Land, for obvious reasons and all the political contentions, but also the kinds of relationships you want to rebuild with land. And in matters because the material aspect of living on this planet, but also the etymology of matters, which is really, it comes from the Greek mother. So my work is really concerned with matrilineal lines and what's lost, primarily because my grandmother was murdered during the war. So anyway, so this is, you saw the excerpt of the poem. The poem is about a whole bunch of things. We can discuss it later if you'd like. I'm going to give a voice to my collaborator, Ludmilla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go. I am Ludmilla. I'm originally from Brazil, and I moved to Canada in 2016. I am by training and by work, a theater director and a theater worker, but I'm also a filmmaker, and it's the part where I collaborated with Sanita. We've been working on the cine poems from Land Matters, one that you can see on the website, and the other we shared with everyone that was in the talk yesterday as well. my work is changing just way too fast. What I did about 18 months ago is completely different than what I do today, and completely different probably of what I'll do at the end of this pandemic. And being a newcomer immigrant also changed that a lot. So it's TBD, to be decided, but it was very fantastic to have them, to encounter Sunita and see how we have completely different backstories, but so many overlapping experiences in the same land and in the same country. So I'm very excited to continue collaborating with her on Land Matters. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dorit?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dorit Naaman, and I'm in Kingston or Cataraqui in Ontario. And I'm part of the Bell Park project, and we produced the single channel video, A Totem Pole on a Pile of Garbage. And I am personally from Jerusalem. So I guess I'm a double settler, even though I'm a sixth generation Jerusalemite. I'm part of a settler project, and that allows a kind of blindness. And when I came to Canada as an immigrant, a very privileged immigrant with an academic job, of course, that allowed and encouraged a different kind of blindness. And my work as a documentarist and as a film critic has been almost always about unraveling and making visible that which national and patriarchal projects don't want you to see. And so my last large collaborative project is called Jerusalem We're Here, and it's an interactive documentary that digitally brings Palestinians back into a neighborhood of Jerusalem from which they were expelled in 1948. Together with Laura Murray, who's here, and Erin Sutherland, who has another conference today, but was here the last 2 days, we applied for a SSHRC funding, which for those of you who are not in Canada, we're lucky to have this kind of federal funding structure that allows for quite a bit of flexibility in projects. And also it's for 4 or 5 years. So it allows for a project to grow. And we applied for a collaborative project with other academics, but also outside of academia, and a research creation project that deals with this site that has both his Indigenous history, some of it represented by the totem pole, but there is more, an environmental, kind of an environmental catastrophe. To my mind, both show the kind of hubris of a kind of techno-scientific Western logic that there will always be solution and that some people are more disposable than others. So we have definitely an interest in looking at environmental and colonial violence side by side, but also at resistance and resilience and renaturalization and the changes that are happening. I guess for this conversation, I would be really interested in thinking a little bit together about the role of beauty in activist art. And I think there is a very large range of work on here, and even within the same site or the same project, one can see things that are incredibly aesthetic and moving, and then things that are just like a direct documentation of somebody speaking to the camera or recording themselves. And mapping, all those things in between. And I'm kind of curious about these accordion archives, flexible archives that have a kind of more artistic nodes, and then more direct policy interventions, and more educational, and how they work for us. And when we think that our activist hat is on, or our artistic hat is on, or for some of us, our academic hat or community member, and how we negotiate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Kelly?
Am I the
Can you
only
hear us?
Kelly? Yes.
No.
Sorry, one moment.
Can you hear us?
Kelly Jimenez.
Yeah, can you not hear us?
Yeah, we can.
You're frozen, it looks like right now.
Can we go after the next person? I don't know if we have like internet.
Okay. Elizabeth Miller. Oh, you're here.
Yeah, I could go. Or Kelly, you're back. You're back. You've come back to us. Yes. You're back. Yeah, you're unfrozen.
Okay, we can go if you want. Okay,
All right.
so- hello, everyone.
Hello.
So we are Kelly Jimenez and Alejandro Franco. We were both born and lived in Colombia, and for a few years we've been in the United States. In our individual practice, we always use materials that were resting without purpose. I have been working primarily in the arrangement of found objects assemblages, but also sculptures and paintings for the last 18 years.
I have been working as an art director for the last 8 years, using everyday objects as tools for inspiration and exploration. Due to our affinity and desire to preserve species on our land, we decided to embark on this journey of making a project to create awareness on the careless use of single-use plastic. Plastic bags are one way we are depleting our oil supply. 8 to 10% of our total oil supply goes to the make of plastic. So we started collaborating on the making of stained glass windows made out of single-use plastic.
We don't normally use plastic because it's a material that seems to evoke everything that is wrong with humanity. We moved to St. Louis 3 years ago with just a few of our possessions. We didn't have any studio equipment or art supplies any longer. We started to notice that packaging material of all sorts was abundant and that it was going in the garbage in the prime of its life. An average American throws away about 10 bags a week. That's 520 bags a year. Just the US throws away an estimate of 100 billion plastic bags annually. So we decided to give a new significance to something so transient and problematic. We thought little actions could create big impacts.
When we started this project, we already had an important message out there through our material, but we really needed to cause impact to our audience. So we decided to create a series of pieces with representations of nature overtaking architectural structures. The plastic, which is a big problematic already present on our landscape, it's used as a filter for one to see the future as we imagine it by the time this plastic decomposes, a place where humans were extinct and nature overcomes our disregardful existence.
Living in such an industrialized world, surrounded by an excessive amount of objects, together with the media, I think it is very important as a visual artist to stay alert for all that poetic potential that is left in discarded materials, to work with it and engage people with this new message that we want to give. Thank you for doing that.
We are honored to be sharing this space with all of you today and be part of a community that values the environment overall. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Alejandro. Elizabeth Miller.
Sure. That was fun, sharing of the screen. Maybe I'll try to do that too. So my name is, I go by Liz, and I've been working on this project with my collaborator, MJ Thompson, who is not here with me today. But my practice is really rooted in participatory media. So thinking of media as a tool to mediate new relationships. For about 15 years, I've been working around issues around environmental racism, environmental justice. And this project began as a course that I was hoping to teach that was called Wastegapes. And the idea was to work with MJ Thompson, who works in education, to teach a course where we would take our students on bikes to different wastegapes throughout the city of Montreal and create a sort of spectacle on bikes, camping in the city, and really thinking through these ideas of what it means to be somewhere. And we were working in coordination with groups throughout the city. And then when COVID came, we realized that we needed to rethink our methodology, and we turned this into a locative app that we are still in the progress of working on. And it was really meaningful for me, somebody who's used heavy media, like media that is wasteful in its production and in its in what happens after. It was really useful for me to begin working with new methods. So thinking of augmentation as a method of augmenting the experience of biking, of being there. And we've been really inspired by Mira's work and all the work in discard studies. So we were really excited to be a part of this conference and this conversation in thinking through different forms, as Dorit said, different forms of representation, different forms of mediation, how we're using aesthetics. And I really loved what Dorit said about the flexible nodes. So this is, in a sense, it's, so far we have 5 different kind of tours throughout the city around these different ideas, but they're fluid and they're changing, and they change with the partnerships that we're developing along the way. And last but not least, there was, because I also saw somebody said it was really interesting to begin to connect our work. I really saw a lot of connections between homelessness in Santa Cruz and some of those important issues that Joy was bringing up. That's really, really keen along our industrial front is a whole kind of itinerant community. So I would love to talk more about that as well, like how we work in these complex partnerships, collaborations, especially myself being somebody at a university with a lot of privilege. But finally, I'll just say this course has sort of resulted, I don't know how people are going to feel about this, but I see pedagogy as a form of artistic creation as well. And so there's been 3 courses connected to this. The first was the Wastegapes. The second was a course called Place Under Pressure, which was primarily a writing course. And I just wanted to, really appreciate the writing that by Sanita that I read in this, and the power of poetry and writing. And the third was a project called a course called On-Site Socially Responsive Research Creation. So I was thinking again of some of those of us who were trying to use that in a sort of more political or place-based way. So that's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. And we've touched on a lot of things that I'm hoping we'll keep touching on through the rest of the afternoon. Kelly Archer, please, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Cool, thanks. I want to audit that course, all the courses you're talking about. That sounds so cool. I'm Kelly. I work with Joy on Untitled and Dispossessed in Santa Cruz, California, aka UP speaking a waswas, indigenous land. I am not an artist. I am an environmental engineer. I think a lot. Most of my days, I think about wastewater, how to treat it, where to put it, and how to meet regulations so it doesn't hurt the environment or humans. I also work a lot with compost and other greywater systems. So I'm more of a hands-on working with waste streams, but also designing management systems in a conventional sense to manage them. I met Joy through a like a county meeting where I was just, we're both concerned citizens. They're talking about homelessness in Santa Cruz. And I mentioned that, you know, folks that live outside, they don't have safe places to go to the bathroom, and that how I spend most of my day designing systems to do exactly that. And we don't provide that level of service to our neighbors that live outside. And so we connected there, I don't know, 7 months ago, and it's been really awesome to engage in an artistic project like this, very outside of my normal mode of thinking. And so it's been really eye-opening to engage, even just open my mind to discard studies. It's all so I think that's all. I sort of came in to help with like mapping. I have mapping experience, but also doing on the ground like outreach work with communities that live outside and organizing otherwise. So it's been a smorgasbord of activities, and I feel like that's reflected on our final product, where it's like we unearthed a lot of histories and also brought in a lot of our own like investigations of things going on right now. But yeah, so I'm like a little junior artist exploring what this all means, and y'all sound so cool and smart, and thanks for having me.
That's good. Thank you so much. It's good to be an emerging artist. Hillary's telling me that there are some other artists with us. Uli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. So my name is Ulises. Uli. I am Mexican. I live in Mexico, Guerrero, my home state. The most famous city is Acapulco. I live in south of that, which is the Costa Chica. This is Musgo territory. That was the name that was given to them by the Mexica Empire, and they call themselves Nyongda. This is territory that was also inhabited by Afro descendants as a space of refuge. And this is where I live and work for the past 2 years, doing a ethnographic research project, part of my postdoc process. And so, yes, my project is the project that I put together for this event is called Afro-Indigenous Symbiotic Ecologies, trying to document artistically the ecoscapes, if you want, that are present here in this region. It's an Afro-Indigenous geography. And while we have resisted mining here, but our mountain neighbors have not. And so if something happens to them, like if there's exploitation in the mountains, we are connected via waterways. And so there's contamination, and that would just devastate further our landscapes. And that's what we work on. I have a degree in performance studies, and it's very difficult for me to say I'm an artist or a performer. I'm somewhere in between all that, and it's very difficult for me to claim that space, although I'd love to. I would love to just say, oh my God, I painted all day, like Mickey says. But it's not where I'm at right now, and I like where I am. It's a mixture of investigation, research, artistic creation, and I also wanted to say thank you to everybody, the organizers, and the projects that came together. They're phenomenal, amazing, beautiful, and it's been a while because I've been stuck in, well, I've worked in different settings, including finance and different things on housing, just to survive and live. But now I found this project and I thought, my gosh, I found home, and it was really nice to be here. So thank you for putting it all together.
Thank you. Hannah.
Hi everyone. I'm Hannah. introduced myself in the chat, but and I spoke yesterday, so I'll just be really brief. I don't identify as an artist, so I wasn't sure if I should introduce myself, but I did contribute to one of the projects that I worked on with my collaborator, Sarah, who's a filmmaker. Yeah, I'm new to kind of the research creation and bringing kind of research, art, and activism together. And I feel really inspired by the projects that everyone has contributed here. And I also, I guess I see so many potentials in kind of expanding what research means. And also, I guess I feel very energized by what I feel like even the places that people seem to be speaking from seem really grounded. And that's, I think, really kind of really nice. So yeah, I'm just kind of here more today to listen and learn from you all. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. Marietta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, however, I'm actually not an artist. I took part in the panel yesterday, so I'm a researcher working more at the intersection of environmental humanities, post-humanities, creative studies, visual culture, environmental arts. So my kind of entry point is more of actually theorizing and thinking very much with art as art and with art as a catalyst of knowledge production, of creating different sensibilities and ways of knowing. Yeah, I mean, I did not know that, I would be called out, but it's of course a pleasure. So I had a little contribution yesterday about environmental grief. I mean, the panel on environmental grief. And I think it's extremely important what, I mean, all those conversations that we have been having throughout. Actually, this is the third day. I mean, it's amazing to realize that. So yes, I mean, it's really an honor to be here, and I would be very happy to, of course, contribute today too. And I think that this is all what I can say. I guess I don't want to take too much space. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hillary is suggesting Laura Murray. Laura?
Hi, sorry, I'm just here to listen. I think Dorit can speak for our project. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, that's fine. Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you. Then, thank you, everyone. And it is lovely to sort of be able to put faces to names and projects that I spent the morning looking at. So I think I'm going to start with the first question. And Hillary, if you put the first question in the chat, so it's the shortest one of them all. So I hope that's a good thing. And we've sort of been touching on it already. There it is. How do the ideas and practices of artists contribute to critical conversations about environmental issues? And I have a list of people's names, so I'll just, but please think about this. And how do the ideas and practices of artists contribute to critical conversations about environmental issues? And I think that when you think about being at a symposium like today, and over the last few days, and beginning with Laakuuluk's wonderful performance, I think that this is, there's so many really great conversations that are just beginning and moving forward. Mickey says she'll start. Thank you.
Hi again. I was really struck I mean, I've really thought about this a lot, and there is something that the arts do that is it's quite unique to the arts, and that is engage our emotions. And I've really found this conference to really like, that is where at the end of our panels and that, like, people are really almost, they're just absorbed everything and they're just trying to sort it all out. And I do think that that power of bringing things into the body is really, really important. And my master's was on transformative learning through the arts. So how does art kind of do this? And when we stay in our mind, which is part of the enlightened thinking, you know, we eliminate so much. It's like decapitating us from experience of the world. And we look at ancient knowledges and stuff. They're very much connected to the body, about being present, about being connected, about being in contact with the earth. And I think we've just kind of missed out in academia often. And so I really think, you know, when we're wanting to stir people up and especially try and change ideas and provoke and all that, you know, I don't know if we have anything else better than the arts.
And I always talk, and for myself, I always talk about the way that the arts are such a good entry point for issues and so many different social issues and all of these things. And I think that that's really coming forward with all of this as well. Uli, please.
Thank you. So yeah, yesterday I was talking about the ways in which art creates a different language for people who may not necessarily have access to scientific language. So this is a huge thing here where I work. I have a PhD in geography and environment. So I trained myself in environmental and climate change and those kinds of things, those kinds of issues. And so I came here and I tried to understand the ways in which local people understand that. And I found that artists have the most impactful way of trying to get to people to understand, create consciousness around the environment, so as to create not a language that has its barriers. Scientific language has its barriers for a host of reasons, including class and race. And so they're not able to access that. How do they get the knowledge in order to speak to climate issues or climate change issues in a very localized manner? And so artists, I think what we try to do in our project is to speak to that, to create a different language, accessible to people outside and people from within. So that was one of the functions that I think art has. It expands the idea of what language is and what's possible to say about this phenomenon, climate change, and also the impacts of it, whether that's waste conceived in its multiplicitous ways.
Maybe I could build on that. I love that, Uli, this idea of expanding our vocabulary. We've been working with a lot of, I guess, what are called like outsider artists, artists who are working along the industrial front with no grants, with no funding, primarily using scraps. And it feels like a lot of the way that they're working is to disrupt, you know, to, you know, for example, in the midst of a abandoned wasteland run by ambivalent ownership, it's this idea of caring, of occupying, of disrupting the logic of that space as unused. As so there's just really fascinating ways of both using waste as primary material, scraps, reuse, but also this is a big word, but structuring our attention. You know, so making me look at that waste site in an entirely new way. And so there's also like discovery. And I was feeling that with Kelly's work. You know, the way that you're kind of reusing all of those materials and placing them in ways, and just seeing a few of your images, I had that very similar feeling of being asked to look again.
Mm. I love that, the idea about being asked to love again or look again, and yes, exactly, and making us think about things in a new way. Sunita, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say that I really like to think with artists. And, you know, when you're doing a PhD and you're in these sort of disciplined areas, I mean, cultural studies at Queen's is kind of undisciplined and really an interesting place to do experimental work. But I really like to think with artists because they are by nature much less disciplined than, let's say, someone coming out of philosophy, environmental ethics, and other departments that are highly disciplined. And what I love about art is that it's a little bit more accessible. I think Uli talked about that, but I kind of wanted to riff off, I don't know if anyone here knows Natalie Lovelace. She's coming from the University of Calgary, and she talks a lot about research creation. And in her research creation manifesto, it's titled Making Art at the End of the World. She says that one of the really important reasons why we need art in these troubled times, socially, ecologically troubled times, is because when you make art, particularly art like, well, I'm a novelist and a playwright and a poet. So she's talking about she opens the book with talking about language and how we have inherited all kinds of meanings. We've inherited all kinds of conceptual maps, right? About, for example, just maps in general about Canada, you know, and how certain stories obscure truths. And it's really important to keep retelling stories, redoing, you know, poetry, because that way we can re-signify, we can claim back certain truths and meanings. And what I love about storytelling in particular, whether that's coming in, you know, literary nonfiction, poetry in particular, I love that, but other genres, what I love about them, including film, right, that's a form of visual storytelling, is that we're immediately re-signifying. And I just wanted to share a screen real quick, because I wrote a piece of literary nonfiction, and it was, you know, kind of hard to enter and try to talk about, you know, how we go from these Enlightenment ideals to more than human embodiments, and using lichen as a metaphor for entanglements, something that Donna Haraway does. So I collaborated again with a friend from Toronto, Nicole Crozier, and we did this triptych, and then we did this really, really accessible social media taglines to say, well, do we really believe in the category of human? Are we not always already more than human? You know, you're a body of water, you're primarily bacteria. So why do we keep seeing human as separate and independent and autonomous from this nature out there when our skin is porous, we are porous and completely entangled? And we were able to tell this really complicated sort of, well, I was basically trying to explain 1,000 Plateau by Deleuze and Guattari, and I did it through just like 300 words for Instagram and Facebook and this image. And that's why I love art, because first of all, it's attractive, it grabs your attention. This is, I know Dorit wants to speak next. Especially for me, when there's an element of beauty, but also disrupting beauty and like the beautifully ugly, right? And the meanings behind that. I just find that really captivating. And I love speaking in art for that reason. I just think it reaches a broad audience and it captivates people. So anyway, I'll let other people speak, but obviously, as you can tell from my enthusiasm, I love to think with artists, even though I have that privileged education of being at a PhD level and coming out of a master's in critical studies and philosophy and understanding, you know, Heidegger and Deleuze and Guattari, and being able to speak that language, but creating something in at different registers. For me, that's the beauty of art, and I love to think with art. Thank you.
And I love that phrase, think with art. I love it. Think with artists. Thank you. Dorit.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll pick up on a few threads that were already talked about. So I think, to me, I worry when art is placed in opposition to science or to academic thinking. And I think research creation really allows us actually to ask or to think really about how we know things. So I think that came up here. How do we know what we know, and can we know differently? Can we have different experiences that will allow us to see that which we were not taught to see, or that is, we want to think about garbage as waste. We want to think about certain people, or we're encouraged to think about certain people as cheaper than other people, or less valuable. So I think that the capacity of art to defamiliarize, to kind of trouble the way we know, and then to offer alternatives, like breaking down the binary of human, non-human that Sunita just showed us, that's where we can be provoked to thinking differently and to knowing in more than facts. So I think that the place of art is not so much as an antidote or an interpreter, or artists, scientists speak the language of science, but artists know how to speak to broad audiences. So we have the opportunity to translate science to the masses, or something like that, right? I don't think that's that there is a place for that, but I think it's allowing everyone, including scientists, to see the world differently, or to ask different questions. So it's really about a conversation. So I think that until the last maybe 10 years, scientists have been warning about climate change since the 80s overwhelmingly, and no one was listening to them. And now, we're at a different point, and there is this kind of maybe awareness, but a lot of the work that's out there, even the work that artists are doing, and a lot of the work that certainly scientists are doing, is utterly depressing, as we talked yesterday in the environmental, the grief, the session about grief. So is there a way to reframe the conversation, right? And to me, one of the things is to decenter the place of us humans. I don't know that as humans, I don't know that we're not going to be obliterated by our own actions, but I don't think that's the end of the world. Right? So, but how did I get there? I got there through knowing in a different way than the narrative of science, than the narrative of me being separate, than the more than human, and all of that. So I guess to me, it's about a conversation. It's about expanding how we know and what we know, involving the emotions, involving bodily knowledge, and communicating it in ways that are engaging. Sorry, that was long, but yeah.
That was great. And I love the idea about how do we reframe and how do we decenter us as humans, and I'm also thinking about how do we so much of what we do, what seems this is moving on to the second question, but it's also sort of thinking about all of you as artists and writers and filmmakers, and sort of being able to step away from sort of a corporate and a Western. Hillary, if you put the second question up, that would be really. Oh wait. Oh, sorry. Pardon me. Joy wanted to respond before we move on. Sorry, Joy. Go ahead. I did not see that. Pardon me.
But that's okay. There's so many. I'm sure there's so many other great questions. We all have so much to say about this. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that for me, as an artist who's been like dying to be in the studio for so many years, and it's such a wonderful thing when I do have a studio to work in the time, I've always questioned the efficacy of getting my message out. Like if I want my artwork to have a kind of propaganda in it, even if it's obtuse, if I don't have, I don't have a big platform, I'm not super savvy about social media platforms, so it can feel a little small, right? So working on a collaborative project that's connected to a larger political organization and a larger community, it does feel like it can do more. It's not the kind of art that I've been making, but it is important to me to make something. That's my language, but it feels really great to be connected in a very particular politically engaged way. And then the other thing is, as we were working on our project, we really felt like at a certain point, we didn't want to tell the story for people. You know, we're coming into this space as outsiders and with a certain amount of privilege. And, you know, it felt a little weird and awkward sometimes. So we started to talk to people. We noticed that a lot of people had their own creative practices, and we started to talk to people about those as we were moving through the space regularly. And we started giving art supplies to people, asking people what art supplies they wanted, and then buying it for them. And it's just so great. It's another way to develop those relationships. And it was another way to build solidarity that I think will continue. And it's been really hard to get, you know, we've invited people to let us take pictures of their things or to contribute more in a firsthand way. And it's really challenging. So I don't think that is seen in the project. It's not reflected really in the project very much right now. But I do hope over time that it will be more, for people to speak in their own voices, to build the solidarity that's not just about food or cleaning up trash, but is also about a creative kinship and some shared languages. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. And sort of, you know, your way of thinking about things moving in and through and all that sort of led me to the next question. Oh, wait. Okay. Thank you, Norwin, telling us that this is a very inspiring discussion, and thank you for that. Hillary, can you put up is there anyone else who wants to speak to that first question? So, so my second question was, because I was also thinking about sort of the way that so many people, so many of the artists and so many of the collectives and collaborators are working together to sort of reveal corporate and corporate biases and that sort of thing, and moving away from that. So how have you as an artist, writer, filmmaker, collaborator worked to reveal corporate and Western philosophical biases that often disrespect non-human nature or disregard the interdependence of humans and non-humans? And Sunita, thank you for coming back. That would be great.
Thanks for having me. I love this question. I'm going to challenge the language of the question a little bit right off the bat to show you the kind of work that I'm excited about and that I'm embedded in. And it's this idea that there is merely an interdependence between humans and other than humans. For me, the way interdependence signals that there's two independent agents that are sort of affecting each other. Well, that is a Western colonial neoliberal bias. And really, when we think about the work of Karen Barat, I don't know who else has read her Meeting the Universe Halfway. It's one of the most exciting books I've ever read. She's a quantum physicist and an ecofeminist and just an overall extraordinary figure that has shown us how completely entangled and interactive we are. What she claims, and she has the mathematics to back this up. Okay, I won't pretend I understand fully the mathematics, but the philosophy of it is what we might call very post-human. And I'd be interested in seeing what our colleague, I just want to make sure I have her name right, Marietta has to say about this, because post-humanism basically collapses these boundaries between human, other than human, culture, nature, right? These boundaries are false boundaries. Culture is associated with the masculine, with logic, with intellect, and then nature is that feminine wilderness that needs to be tamed and domesticated, right? These binaries are very sexist, heteropatriarchal, and frankly, they are the very things that manifest in our language. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Breeding Sweetgrass, she's an indigenous botanist, talks about how English is such a colonizing, objectifying language towards other than humans that we think we're separate from. She uses the pronoun it. She says, you know, why is a tree an it? When a tree is a sentient living being. However, you know, we call it a nit. The same thing with water. Water is consciousness, it's lively, it's made of our bodies, right? We are in and of it, and yet we other it with it and separate ourselves And so in the very question, this idea of interdependence between one and the other collapses in my work. And I try to create poetry in which you see this entanglement, this interaction. And let me tell you, it is incredibly, shockingly difficult because the language itself does this. We've inherited this way of thinking, not just through systems of power, but in the language itself, which thinks us. And it does things, it's performative. So while I'm constantly fighting with English, and it's very difficult. English is my third language. It took me a really long time to master it, which is why I'm constantly, I want to do cinepoems, I want to do images, because I find that they don't need a particular language. There's much more direct access to it for refugees or immigrants or people who do not speak English. I know someone is saying they wrote a book about that, and I'm really curious to read it. But so I'm constantly fighting with language in order to enact a kind of entanglement, in order to animate also other than humans. And Elizabeth Pavanelli, who talks a lot about indigenous populations in Australia, really shows us how English as well, and this comes from corporation, they benefit from this kind of de-animation of other than humans. If you de-animate animals, you can objectify and instrumentalize them, right? Because they're just they're these mechanical things, they're lower than the divine human. But in addition, we don't just de-animate organic beings like plants and animals, we de-animate mountains and waterbeds, and we de-animate coal and rocks. And since they're inanimate, right? Since they're not life, well then, of course, we can extract them and sell them for profit and move them through transnational networks of exploitation. And so what Pavanelli claims is that this Western heteropatriarchal de-animation and this border between life and non-life is just basically a construct, because many indigenous populations and other populations, including peasant populations, see water as lively and therefore deserving of justice and care. So those are the kinds of things I try to do in language, and I find it incredibly difficult. It's a challenge doing this work, and that's why I totally love collaborations and transmedium stuff, because it can do things that like maybe English is not that good at, but an image is really good at doing it, or a sound. So I'm going to end here and allow others to speak. But yeah, this is just a really exciting question, as you can tell, just lights me up.
And Marietta, did you want to take the challenge of talking about this as well?
Sorry, I mean, I'm kind of turning on and off this whole thing here. Well, I mean, I can sort of like really subscribe to that. Of course, I mean, I think that Bharat's framework itself is also sometimes asking for, kind of critical reflection. And I think that this is why we are also asking for probably, decolonial and indigenous perspectives, because one can also say, okay, I mean, this has been also, in other non-Western knowledges for a long time. I think what really comes important in probably Bharat's framework is the question of the kind of agential cut. So we are all entangled. There are interactions in the sense that, we are not preformed before we enter into some sort of interaction with other entities. We actually emerge, I mean, and I'm saying we in this very, unspecified way of both humans and non-humans. So like all entities are kind of created in this sort of interactive manner in the moment of the process. However, of course, I mean, there are other factors, there are structural factors that sometimes draw a cut, like this cut that actually sort of has the kind of decisive power on, who is positioned in the privileged way or who is sort of, discarded. And I think that these perspectives that take more than human in various ways, in both ways that are, the kind of post-humanist theories and the kind of non-Western knowledges are extremely important to actually look at that. So, I mean, I'm super excited by your work, Sanita. I mean, this was amazing what you showed us, and also your work that is, on the Symposium website. And I think that this is really, really important to kind of, rethink, like, what does it do to our imaginaries? And maybe just speaking a little bit back to the previous question about, the kind of power of art in this. I think actually art is extremely important to open up, other kind of sensibilities that perhaps might be more, I'm sorry for using the word, effective in actually opening our minds and, kind of also relatedness towards, more than human world in ways that are perhaps more fruitful than, like all the different, conceptual frameworks or philosophical frameworks. Because I do really, believe in this very specific power of art and kind of touching other levels than just conceptual levels and reaching out much more and mobilizing things in ways that theory does not always manage to mobilize, actually. So I think that this would be my little, 5 cents here, if I may.
Thank you. And Dorit wanted to respond.
Yeah, I have, I think, 2 things to say. The first is that I'm just a little wary of romanticizing our relationship to the more than human, in the sense that, how do I obtain consent from the spaces I work with, right? How do I know that these spaces want that attention? We're working in a park that is kind of very abandoned, and it's not a super exciting place. It's not a neat place. It's not a remarkable place. And perhaps all this attention we're going to draw to it is not going to be something that is welcomed by the beavers or the trees. So that's one question that I'm kind of grappling with in my relationship. How am I accountable to the trees and the water and the other beings without being able to have a real conversation in the way that we have with other humans, right? Or even some animals that can communicate. But the second thing I wanted to say is that I'm worried about this idea of nature, and obviously a lot of people, problematize this concept, and Sunita talked a little bit about this too. So we're working in a space that was a wetland, and then some genius decided to throw toxic garbage on the water. Beyond me how anyone thought that was a good idea, and it got permission. And then the federal government came and said, oh, you can't do that anymore. And then, so they put a bunch of soil on top, and they opened a golf course that is city owned, which is also interesting, right? Class also plays into this in different ways. And then they closed this golf course, and they have plans to make it a manicured park. But along the way, an individual woman in town sued the city because she said it's a very toxic site. And eventually she won with support from environmental groups. And the city has to monitor and remediate a little bit the leachate. And one of the things they did is they planted all these poplars. So, okay, rows and rows of poplars, monoculture, not nature by any kind of stretch of the imagination. And yet, for 40 years now, this is part of the ecology of this park, as is the garbage that's underneath. So I think that what I want to think about is an ecosystem, and our friend and collaborator on the project, Laura Cameron, who's a geographer, told us that the root of eco is ecos, which is where things live. And all these things are living now there together. Some are invasive species, some were planted, some were human intervention, some were a natural response to human intervention. And so those systems are not I guess to go back to the question, I feel that my role as a filmmaker and as an artist or as a cultural provocateur is to peel those layers and to make some of that visible and legible and audible, and to get the people who are coming to this space ideally some of the civic planners to actually, again, see differently, think differently, experience differently, so that some of those binaries that are kind of in the Western philosophy of the separation between the self and other and humanity and everything else are kind of diffused a little bit or poked at a little bit or challenged a little bit. I don't expect everyone to kind of go and read Karen Barad right away, but maybe a little bit, like a little shift. But I also recognize that, again, these are my goals from my position as a research creation person in academia, and that some of the people that we work with that are community members that have incredible amount of knowledge and very well articulated and thought about agendas about this space, they sometimes have much more immediate needs. And their immediate needs are not about destroy the master with the master's tool or destroy the whole system, but just get what we need right now because it feels urgent.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to this question? I think it's really interesting the project that you're just talking about, Dora, with the sort of layers, because the next question is about the use of place or the idea of place, but just even as you are working within a very, and many people are working within a pretty specific idea of place, but the idea of the layers of that sort of ecosystem or whatever it is that's sort of been, sort of come over across, going from like a natural waterway space to a wetland to a garbage site, then to a golf course and all the garbage that comes with a golf course, and then finally now to parkland, and how, sort of the way that that space has changed over time as well. But so my third question, I think comes out of this, it comes towards that as well, but how do you as an artist use the idea of place to support an increased understanding of environmental issues? And I was thinking this morning as I was reading Uli and his collaborators' work on the area that of Chico, sort of Coco Chico. I'm sorry, I've lost the name of it right now, but is very they're not in their area, the region, they're not specifically having the mining happen, but the space is actually things that are happening just not too far away, and part of the ecosystem, and the riverways and things like that are having a direct impact on them as well. Would anyone like to speak to the idea of place to support an increased understanding of environmental issues?
I can break the awkward silence. No one wants to go. Okay. So I think for me, place is just so important because that's where you build relationship, and that's where you peel the layers of the onion. And I think that goes back a little bit because I kind of bit the hook of Dorit's question about the potential traps of romanticizing place and romanticizing other than human beings, in much the same way that like colonials romanticized indigenous people, right? When in terms of that kind of discourse of exoticizing, romanticizing all the problems that come with that. I think one of the answers, as I'm thinking with Dorit's question, is to actually build relationship with the other than humans, with that river, not just advocate for that river or write pretty poems about that river, but actually establish a relationship in the situated ecological milieus that you're at. So for me, in Land Matters, I got a grant from the Frontenac Park Association. I think they're called Friends of Frontenac. And they give their grants to like scientists to go measure something about the soil. And I convinced them that I would go there and create poems that would like show how entangled we are with Frontenac Park, and ended up writing this incredibly critical thing, because the moment you go into place, you establish a relationship in the present and you realize that that place has different temporalities. It exists here in the relationship between me and the forest and the river and, you know, the beaver dam. But I started, you know, it was kind of impossible for me not to recognize that the trees are very young. Why are the trees all so young in a provincial park? Well, because they were all razor clean. And then at some point, the land was stolen from the indigenous people, given to farmer settlers. Those settlers entered into extreme poverty because the land is not fertile for various ecological reasons. And there's this whole like moment that you enter into place, you have that relationship, and it has different temporalities. And I think Dorit's speaking to that really well in her project, how spectral spaces are, not just in terms of like their ecosystems and the many inhabitants that are there, but just the spectral temporalities too. So for me, place is this like grounded in the here and now, but it can never really be grounded in the here and now because it has all kinds of things calling to your attention from the past and the future. So all of my ideas are always end up being situated in images. Poetry is a medium that wants images, otherwise it's too abstract. I'm not writing an essay, right? I'm writing a poem. So yeah, it's super important. Place is essential as the beginning. My poem has different pilgrims back to Bosnia and pilgrims across Quebec and Canada and the problems with place. And I'm constantly integrating, I can't help it. And I'm really curious to see how others do this work. I do integrate elements of beauty amidst extraordinary violence and ugliness that I see in different places, especially war-torn Bosnia. For me, of course, it's a very difficult place to write about. So that's my sort of momentum gearing answer for others to sort of take up.
And Ludmila, you were going to speak to it as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different angle from Sunita, but when I think about artistic practice rooted in place, I have to think about how I come from Latin America and now I live in North America. I'm originally from Brazil, and sometimes we talk about environmental issues or we talk about how to deal with this in a universal way, but each place has a different entry point into how or why they talk about it, or how to convince them that this is important, or why it's not important to them. So to me, when you prompt the question about the idea of place, I automatically link to culture, which was my home culture and the culture that I'm in now, and how any issue that I talk about, really any topic, has completely different entry points. If I'm talking about race, if I'm talking about environmental issues, if I'm talking about sexism, from anything, very different entry points because of the place where those countries, those nations, and those cultures are in their own journey to be able to talk about it. So I think, to me, I'm constantly making this exercise about which is one of the reasons why my my areas are TBDs, is this exercise of, if I'm talking to Brazilians, I would talk through this angle and in this place and through this. But if I'm talking to Canadians, this thing, it's sometimes a completely different thing. So that's what your question prompts for me to think about.
Thank you. And Laura Murray.
Sorry, I said I wasn't going to say anything, but I got drawn in. I guess I'm a literature scholar originally, and so one of the ways that I think that I may contribute is through thinking about words. And one of the things that has occurred to me very recently, because of a recent kind of environmental political crisis in our city, I work with Dorit right on the same project, is that Transport Canada is proposing dredging the entire Cataraqui River harbor area to get rid of the toxins that are in it. We all agree there's toxins in it. There's a great flurry of activity as we try and find out what the proper science is here. So everybody's, lining up the scientists on one side or the other. Many of us are not very able to, we don't necessarily have the expertise to assess between these different scientific claims. And I've just been thinking, and in fact, it was prompted by just talking about talking yesterday or whenever it was in this conference. I've been thinking about the language of cleaning up and cleansing, and the fantasy of cleaning up. So there's a fantasy that we could clean up the Inner Harbor if we just kind of, scrape it with a strong enough shovel and broom or something like that. And that was the same fantasy that animated the creation of the landfill. We're cleaning up the city by putting this dump in what they used to call a sanitary landfill, right? Put all the garbage in one place. That's a way of cleaning up other places. And then they thought they were cleaning up the dump by making a golf course, and so on and so forth. So just kind of inviting people to think about, to have some degree of suspicion about what I would say is the fantasy of cleaning up. And as we know, from the phrase ethnic cleansing, et cetera, how it can be used in various social ways as well. So that's sort of one thing that I think that our project may be able to somehow illuminate, which would be a direct contribution to a current dilemma in the city. And then just, even I think the site itself and the park, that's the other park that's adjacent to us, is a very obvious invitation to make people even think about the word land. There's so much emphasis of land acknowledgements, etc. Well, one of the land acknowledgements is that this actually wasn't land. Like, this land was not indigenous land. It was indigenous wetland maybe, but it was not indigenous land. No, it's colonial land. Like, it was invented by colonial processes. So can we think, and most of the big cities in the world are on rescued land. We call it rescued. They're basically built on fill. San Francisco, New York City, whatever. Any city with a harbor filled in the harbor and expanded, right? So this is how cities operate. So I think that there's and wilderness is another thing, because people go to this space to be with nature, another word, and it is, so I think that these are things that people will, I hope that they will be able to grasp through engagement with our project, that they'll get it themselves, actually, just by this combination of engagement with place and having to realize that none of these words quite fit. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Thank you. And I was also thinking, Liz, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but I was as Laura and Dorit have talked about their space, and I was thinking about your bikes and your app going through Montreal, and how the sort of mapping of the city, and also sort of and mapping those waste sites of the city of the island of Montreal. But how Montreal, situates itself as a sort of a bike-friendly and a zero-waste devoted or policy sort of way of being in the world, and how that sort of changes the way that we think about this place as well, because we're taking our bicycles and we're taking your app and we're going around and we're identifying these sites that are sort of hidden and sort of are made very anonymous. So if Liz, if you're still here, it would be lovely to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all these very deep, provocative questions. I feel kind of tongue-tied, I was just thinking place, geography, space, landscape, land, view, territory, location, site. And I was thinking so when I think of place, I think to, of relationship, how do we use art to help foster relationships that are beyond this kind of consumptive capitalist way, so I think of place as about forging relationships, and so much about, and forging as Dorit said, layers of understanding. So with the app and the bike tour, what we are also trying to do is very similar to, I think, the work of Dorit and her team of the layering, who and what has come before in terms of, and what are the impacts of humans and infrastructures on these complex and entangled environments. But I'm really I have to be honest with you. Like right now, I feel like I'm kind of in this this moment of unease with the project, which happens all the time, which is about a bit of what Dorit was saying about like the attention. I sort of started by saying, we're trying to structure attention, but I'm also hyper aware of what it means as an insider outside to go to these places and to draw attention to these places, and the sort of tension between advocacy and harm. And also even like I've been reading a lot of urban planners, who speak to the gentrifying influence of bike and tours. And so I'm constantly like in this state of tension, because on the one hand, I'm an environmental activist who would like to see less cars on the road, and I'm like 100% this city that is like literally making space in the city for people to commute differently. And this feels really important and really exciting to me. And then I'm also like aware that these bike paths have multiple uses. They in some respects they're seen as a gentrifying element, but in other conversations they're seen as a sort of radical transportation tool. So I feel like to hold that complexity is the role of the artist, and it's hard. It's really hard to sit with it. But it's been one of the questions that came up, which I feel like is a little easier to answer, is how has our sense of place shifted with COVID? And I just feel like so many of us who have really been grappling deeply with the places around us and seeing them and engaging with them and thinking about the role of public parks, with everything else shut down, and what does it mean to care for places? Like suddenly I'm just going on and on, so I'm going to pause here, but suddenly all these places that we've taken for granted in the ways that they've been managed are kind of overwrought with good intentions, and overwrought with overwrought with uses. And so it's a very, very fascinating time for us, I think, to be collectively thinking about local places and how we might, really think together as artists, as planners, all these amazing people in this space, who've identified themselves. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you, Laurie, for asking. I was kind of tongue-tied because there's so many things I'm thinking at the same time.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a really great question as well. And I'm also very aware of the fact that we're now at 4:34 and the time has slipped by very, very quickly. But I love that question. How has COVID and the pandemic shifted our sense of place? And if anybody else would like to speak to that, that would be really great. And maybe we can forget about my questions as well. There's two more, but that I painstakingly put together a week ago. But I think that I think that and then also somebody brought up the idea of the role of beauty in activist art as well. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts about those two things as well. And then I think this is also a really perfect opportunity for people to just sort of start to ask each other questions as well, because this is like our last 25 minutes together. So unless we all have a whatever, go off for a beer together at some point. But how has the COVID-19 and the pandemic shifted your sense of place? I think for me, it certainly made, this is the most static year that I've had in a really, really long time. And I'm just, I've more than anything else, because I hardly, for 11 months, I hardly even left my neighborhood. And so, in Montreal, we've been under a curfew for big chunks of the last while. And so either just sort of, getting out and only going far enough that you can actually get back in time to not not be outside, when not to be a scofflaw, and but then also just to be within the sort of the distance of within the distance of our street or our house and that sort of thing. And that, so it's really making me think about and I'm becoming very much more aware of sort of the people on our street and building relationships in that way. And I think that that's been something that, just because I was always the one that was going off and doing something and being somewhere else and getting on an airplane or a train or getting into a car and going off and moving around in that way. So I just feel really that that it's, you know, I'm discovering the sort of microcosm of even of Montreal personally.
I think, like, to me, and I also traveled a lot. So first there was no travel, and there was no seeing my family in Israel, you know, which was hard. But my first impetus was go local, really go local, in how the donations I make, the kind of volunteering that I do. Luckily, some other people in Kingston organized the mutual aid Kataraqui, which is really incredible and has grown and responded to the situation with the concept of mutual aid rather than just donations, and also building on relationships. And so I think that, and it was very kind of opportune for us that we wrote the grant before COVID, but we got the funding into COVID. And at the same time, we had all these events planned, which we couldn't do. And we couldn't even legally gather in the space, right? Even though it's outdoors, there are limitations. So, so it really changed how we worked. But we also have a collaborator who is in Calgary, and we have a collaborator who is in Alderville, and meeting on Zoom does become an equalizing factor in some sense, right? So it's a little, I think, hard to reflect in a long term on what the effects of that will be on the project. For now, I think they have been, first of all, it slowed us down, which is a blessing. Really, just took a while to just meet and talk and read. A lot of the people who were mentioned today and over the last 3 days we've been reading in this past year, and find out who we need to talk to and ask questions and go for many walks in the park and build the relationship to the space itself. And those are all good things, that we weren't in that kind of neoliberal rush all the time, right? To just produce. So yeah, I think it's kind of for me, it's a mixed bag. But I think that overall, for people, not for us as artists or people who are working in very particular ways with environmental concerns, I think for my neighbors, for the people in the city, having to spend the year learning about local parks and learning about activities that don't require getting on a plane or a car or train has been really interesting. And I hear of people talking about, oh, I didn't know all these things existed, right? So so that's been a kind of a blessing, I think, localize.
Great. And Joy, you were going to speak to it?
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting situation here, where COVID has, on the one hand, you know, continued to exclude or even increase exclusion to shelter and services for certain people. And on the other hand, it's some people, not enough of them, who have disabilities or are, you know, at higher risk for COVID, have been in hotel rooms for almost a year or about a year now. So there was sort of, you know, COVID. Well, also, let me step back a second and, well, no, forwards. So we have COVID, shelters and services closed down. People are, you know, outside, like, what do we do? Some things are created with federal and state funding to help them out, like Project Room Key, which put a few hundred people in hotels, but excluded a lot of people who then had, they're sort of even more left behind than before. And then we had fires, wildfires that came closer to the city of Santa Cruz than like ever historically. And I think, people are still displaced from the fires and have lost their home, 900 and some homes were burned and a few multifamily homes in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the rebuilding process is very long. People still don't have their homes. Some people can't even be on their properties yet. So this crunch over housing that we have locally is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States as a bedroom community of Silicon Valley. And it just crunched that even more. There are people who were displaced from the fires who were previously housed, who are living in like informal communities of RVs still. There are people who have lived outside for decades even, who have historically sheltered in some of our open spaces. And if you look on our project page, there's a couple of maps that Connor, who hasn't been able to be here, made that are kind of amazing visually, but also information-wise, of the WUI and zoning, and then there's some other maps of that our nefarious city manager's office and council members have come up with that represent where people shouldn't be because they're sensitive habitats or they're fire prone. And then you can see next to it a sort of activist map, which it shows where people can stay. It's sort of like an inverse, and how you tell the story of a place through maps. It really means something different. Who's making the story? It's like who's writing the history. And there's such a complicated history here in Santa Cruz. The Santa Cruz Mission is right up the street from the highway where we've been doing all of our work. So there's this temporal layering of colonization, and then there's and long histories of exclusion and labeling people. And now real estate is just like in the mix of everything, messing with local politics, getting progressive city councilors recalled and getting in more conservative. They think they're progressive, but they're really conservative former Republicans as council members. It's pretty messy, and the maps can reveal different things depending on who makes them. And then COVID can kind of complicate things by allowing. So another little piece of the puzzle is COVID allowed people to stay in one of our main parks, San Lorenzo Park. There was a successful blocking of a camp sweep right before Christmas. And the shelter in place order meant that a federal judge said, no, you can't displace, 150 people in the middle of a pandemic. They don't have anywhere else to shelter in place. This is it. You have to let them stay. And so, as shelter in place orders are coming to an end, that protection will likely be rescinded. And the hotel rooms that people have been sheltering in, the funding is ending. So it's, COVID has been a blessing and a curse in a whole lot of ways. It's just even too complicated to relay the whole story here.
Yeah, and I think that it reverberates across many big cities, and certainly that was the case in Montreal as well, is that they suddenly had to think about the homeless or the houseless population and how that had an impact on these people when our premier brought in the idea of a curfew. And it's all very well if you live in a you've got housing and all that, and so again they sort of relied upon you know, a former hospital and hotel spaces, but then they also just, you know, let people sort of who live on the street, they had to be able to be outside of the restrictions of the curfew, and so it just made, you know, and it was in the winter time, and it also just was like a sort of educational thing as well, because it gave people, you know, heavens above, you know, we didn't know that there were people, you know, didn't know people were still living on the street and that would be impacted in this way, and look at what it's done for my life, and oh, woesy me. But this is, you know, so it's really interesting, and it's been really yeah, it's been really super challenging for everybody. Exactly, so thank you for that. Joy had suggested that Kelly might like to speak to this question, but Kelly did write in the chat that but I won't speak for you. Go ahead, and you can talk to that. But also, this might also be a really nice way to sort of segue into talking about the other question that somebody had brought up, but about the role of beauty in activist art, and I was really aesthetically drawn to the work that you're doing with the plastics and things like that. So if you can move from one to the other, that would be lovely. Oh, are they frozen? Darn. Does anybody else want to speak to the idea of beauty? And when we wait for Kelly's internet to come back. Also, Sunita has a question that she'd like to ask some of the artists, including Joy.
Yeah, I can talk about that from my perspective for a second.
Mhm.
I am a person that is very conscious about, when doing work, being very kind with the material that I'm talking, the stories or the angles of the stories that I'm talking about, and to try to focus on the beauty of ordinary living, really. And I borrow a lot of that from the ideas of Afrofuturism and Indigenous futurism, because it's trying to find possibilities, it's trying to find ways, reimagine ways to see things. And I think, to me, I particularly I can only consume art that has beauty in it, because everything else with media and internet, the ugliness part of things are bombarding me at all times. So I feel very conflicted about producing art that is also talking about that. And I feel like I need, and I have this almost only way to do art today, which is different from the training that I had, because when I started in theater, I actually did a lot more in your face theater, let's call it like that. Today is very different. I just look at what are the things that I can't find in my life. And I think, because I'm being bombarded with very problematic things all the time, I would love for art to, for a moment, just give me beauty. Just to reimagine things, just to find the magic in having a cup of coffee, just to find the meaning, and also not intellectualize too much. It's just a cup of coffee, and it's enough to be a cup of coffee, and it's a beautiful and warm cup of coffee, and it's worth living for that cup of coffee. So that's a bit where I am in that sense nowadays.
Thank you. And Kelly, can you come back to talking about the idea of beauty in environmental art?
Can you hear us now?
Yes, yes.
So basically, beauty is like our biggest quest. That's what we're always searching for. And trying to have a low carbon footprint is like our biggest mission while trying to achieve that beauty. And ultimately, and then I guess going back to this other question that we were asked about COVID in this area, right? Like basically we live in the Midwest, which is like very red, very Republican. So, but we live in a city that is very blue within a really red state. So although we live in a red state, there is like plenty of consciousness within the city where we live on, so.
We have spent like a year watching everything happen through our windows, most likely. I work for a textile company that it's located in Miami, and with COVID that had allowed me like to work from home, like far away from the company that I used to work for many years.
And has it had an impact on sort of the way that you're thinking about across time and from your you sort of the sense that you know, as you're two artists who have come to the United States and are working in the context of a new place and looking back and forth across time, has that has it sort of changed your perspective in terms of the pandemic and all, or?
Well, I mean, I guess we never thought of it that way, but I mean, we're always changing. We used to live in Florida, so we moved from Colombia to Florida in separate ways. Then we met in Florida, and then from Florida we moved here to the Midwest because we wanted to experience something different. We grew up in the tropics, so we had never experienced the season change. Mm-hmm. So that was like the reason why we moved up here. And by moving, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Miami, but Miami is very Latin American. So by living in Miami, we hadn't really lived an American experience. So by moving to St. Louis, it's like these last 3 years that we've been here, it's just been, although we've been living in the United States for a few more years, this has been like the American experience. I don't know if COVID has anything to do with that, but it's almost like the whole time that we've been here, COVID has been around. So
it has allowed us to work a lot and put a lot of time into our work.
Mm-hmm.
Our studio is in the same building that we live, so we had like a lot of time to spend in the studio.
Very nice. That's great. And would anyone else like to speak to the idea of beauty in the environmental work that you're doing?
May I say a few sentences and then ask a question? I know it's very late in the game to ask a question.
Go for it.
Well, I in my previous life, in my 20s, I did a minor in art history. I know, Lori, I think you said you're an art critic, so I don't want to speak too much. It was over 10 years ago, but I do remember that I read a book about the history of beauty, and you might as well just sort of take that and just sort of contrast it with the history of patriarchy or heteropatriarchy or colonialism, because really, who defines what is beauty, right? And what is ugliness? And so there's just like a lot to deconstruct there. I say that, and yet I too am moved by beauty. It captivates me, but just in the same way as ugliness captivates me, and in the same way that Picasso's early works were certainly not seen as beautiful, or even maybe some of Bosch's work in the I don't know, was he in the late 15th century. Bosch is just this Dutch painter. He's just, it's beautiful and ugly and barbaric and strange. And I love it. So I have to say, I love everything. I have a taste for everything. But, beyond beauty, I do love the beautiful moments. Beyond beauty, if there's just beauty and it's kind of obscuring the truth or obscuring the ugliness or the violence of the world, then that becomes somewhat problematic. But yes, I'm drawn to beauty. And I also have a question for Joy. My question for Joy departs from beauty. I'm curious to know, Joy, if you've ever heard of the housing first model. I was a social service worker to pay it forward for a year. And I housed homeless people in Ottawa. I drove the Sally Ann Salvation Army van till 3 a.m. and found people under bridges and bushes and brought them to shelter. And also was able to, in the 1 year that I could withstand that kind of work, because it was incredibly difficult. It was the job where I got the least paid and where I got, hurt several times. It was just so dangerous and difficult. But have you heard of the housing first model? Do you guys have that? I know that in Ottawa, it works really well, and people who are unhoused are actually given permanent housing, and that housing is paid for. And then the Housing First team connects them to health services, physical health, mental health, and also does the important job of providing people with ID so they can enter the system and receive services. And then my other question is for Liz. Liz, I love your apps. I'm going to download your apps. I'm just wondering have you ever thought about potentially doing an app where you teach people how to forage? I know there could probably be some risks involved with that. What if I get the wrong mushroom and die? But I've always dreamt of someone creating an app to teach me how to forage around Ottawa or even Montreal, because that's something that I've always wanted to learn. And so I was just wondering, I know that you expose waste networks, but do you also expose these beautiful networks of food, So just a quick question, and perhaps an idea, an enticement for you. Thank you.
I'll just answer super quickly that there is a version of Housing First here. I can't remember now the year that they started it, but it's been a while. And it's complicated. I think it's been a small success for some. It's also been really heavily criticized for, basically people have support in their housing for a year, and for some people it's just not enough. And in the images on our story map, you see the big building behind the sign, that Housing Matters sign with how many people housed is it used to be more of a shelter-based program with day services, and because of grant money, basically, they've switched to a Housing First model. And all of us, like, you ask what the solution is for people living unhoused. Well, duh, it's housing, and not pallet houses or tiny home villages, but real houses. But we have so that Housing Matters switching to a housing model has excluded a lot of people, hundreds of people, from survival services that they need day to day. And I don't think it's being adequately addressed. The fact is people are outside and they really need more. They also need houses. So what was the other part of the question? I can't remember.
That was it. The other part was for Liz.
Yeah.
No, thank you for answering that, because I also read that Housing First models work in some cities because they're delivered differently than other cities. It's a very uneven program. I was just curious to hear about how it worked in your city.
Yeah, complicated and mixed.
I was going to say, first of all, Sanita, I just love your enthusiasm and your veracity. And anytime you want to collaborate on a future project to forage together, you let me know. I should just say the app is site responsive. So you actually have to be in Montreal. And it's like Pokemon. You have to go to the place, which is why the gift of this project, this initiative, was for us to share some of our content outside of the app, and we're still kind of thinking about how that works. But I also wanted to say that anybody who is in Montreal and would like to go on a collective walk together using the app or a bike ride, any of us, I would just love to do that together. And that could be maybe like a summer thing, to really use it as a method of being in space together, being in place together. So I'll put that out as an opening. But I also just wanted to say one last thing about aesthetics, Laurie and Dorit, who importantly brought that to our attention. I'm really interested also in this idea of aesthetics and care. I've been a little bit obsessed about micro places, like I live in a very dense neighborhood, and everybody has been tending to their front yards in ways I've never in my life seen. And not traditional, like usually it seems that people who care for yards, there's an aesthetic of a yard. But in my neighborhood, we have like these insane permaculture things where there's just like chaos. And then we have another yard that's like the diversity of aesthetics and environment and care is kind of blowing my mind, because I think also goes back to Lori, what you were saying is like so many people have been at home and in that respect have been tending to these micro places that are that are near them, and it's amazing, you know, to just see this emerge.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Miigwech, so much for your good words today. Thank you for the work that you're doing, whether you consider yourself an artist or otherwise. This has just been, it's been lovely to hear from everyone and to hear from so many different voices. The work and the art making that you're doing, the research creation projects are really inspiring and engaging, and I'm just so very pleased to have been part of all of this. And so thank you very much. Thank you, Mickey and Jacob and Myra and Hillary. And I hope I've gotten all of you, and I can't say everybody's names, but thank you so much. This has been a lovely, lovely time. And I'm thrilled to have been here. So Miigwech.
I'm thrilled too, and I want to thank everybody's participation. I felt like this has really been or become a community, and that is something quite special. And you know, whenever things look dim, it seemed like we got to talk to some artists or something, especially Hillary and I, and we always said that was the best, you know, it gave us hope. So anyway, I think it's been a long session, and it's been very fruitful, and I want to say best of luck to everybody. Keep in touch, and we'll sort of let you know from here on in what's going to happen about the website and stuff. We have a few decisions to make, but I know a lot of people have said they would like to have access extended. So, you know, anyone who has that password, I think we'll consider that. You know, that sounds like a really good idea. I know I'm still reading and looking, you know, taking things in, and to do that properly, it takes some time. So anyway, Chi Miigwech, thank you very much, and adieu, adieu, adieu. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.